So I think arguably the most common methods of lighting fires today are probably with one of these, or with one of these. Looking back over history, there's one method of fire lighting which probably stood the test of time for longer than any other, and that is flint and steel. But it's a dying art, and I think a lot of people today would never have even thought about using flint and steel fire making. So I'm going to give it a go, see if it works. Never done it before. Let's get into it and see what happens. So, as the name suggests, it uses two main things. Flint, a piece of stone with a sharp edge, and steel. Okay, this is a steel striker designed specifically for the job. So flint and steel fire making goes back till about 1200 BC, when the first evidence was sort of coming around that it was a method being used. It was known that tribal people would be carrying flint, and this is about the time of the beginning of the Iron Age, when we started making metal tools, and they realised that by banging the two together you would cause a low temperature spark, and it could ignite dry tinder. So this is the modern equivalent. This is a piece of flint, obviously hasn't changed in thousands of years. This is a steel striker, made nowadays of high carbon steel, so of course the iron content is much higher than probably the tools that were being used back in the day, but still it's going to hopefully throw a good amount of sparks. I've never done this before. This is the first time I've knocked these two things together. Let's see what happens. Had my first spark. Oh, there we go. Don't know if the camera's going to be picking this up, but oh, there we go. So there's some very, very light sparks coming off of that. Obviously this is brand new, so it's got to wear down a bit of a layer. So what's happening there? The science behind it is the flint is acting as a knife. The sharp edge is hitting the edge of the steel, which is causing tiny amounts of iron filings to be released from the steel, which are oxidizing with the air and igniting. There you go, I'm getting my eye in now. So then that low temperature spark needs to be able to catch onto something, and that we use what's called char cloth. I'll go into in another video on what char cloth is and how to make it, but this is just going to be, does it work, can I get it going, and we'll see. So I have a small tin here that contains what we call char cloth. As you can see, it's a very fine, hold up against the light, it's a very fine mesh of pure cotton, and it's been charred to a point where it can take a spark. So this becomes very brittle. Obviously with the charring process it becomes quite brittle, but by folding it in half and placing it upon the steel strike, the flint there, hopefully we can strike this down and one of those sparks will just land on top, and all it needs to do is land and it will ignite the char cloth, and then we can blow the ember to create more heat. And there we go, only took a few sparks. Don't know if you can see it. And as you can see, it's burning its way through the char cloth quite quickly actually. Put that down because that's getting hot. So that didn't take too much. I was quite surprised how quickly that went. So now we need to gather up some tinder to be able to throw spark onto the char cloth, put it in a tinder bundle, and then blow that tinder bundle into flame. So I'm going to take a wander around, see if I can find some dry tinder, and then we'll see if we can get this fire on. So here I found a good section of bracken. Obviously it's on a field edge, so you want to make sure it's quite dry. Unfortunately we had quite a misty morning this morning, so it could still retain a bit of moisture, but if I get these bits that have been in the sun, and as you see I'm just cutting the stems. One thing I will say about this is that if you haven't got gloves like I have, make sure you're cutting it, because if you bend it like that and try and pull it, it's more so when it's green, but if you bend it and try and pull it, it splinters and it goes, and trust me, they go deep. That should be more than enough to take a spark, and then we can put our char cloth inside here and we can blow it and hopefully produce a good flame. So I've now brought all my pieces together. I've got my flint, I've got my steel, I've got my char cloth, and I've got my bracken. One other thing that we can use to ignite the bracken is jute twine. So what I'll do is I'll pull, this is just regular twine like you would use in the garden. I'm going to pull off sort of a few inches of that, 4 inches, what's that, 100 mil, and then I can unravel it and create a really fine fibrous nest, which I can then put within the bracken, and that will also help catch the ember from the char cloth. So there we go. That's a piece of twine, all sort of teased apart, made into a really fine fibre. Right, now let's see if we can put all the ingredients together, get the method right, and see if we can throw a spark onto the char cloth, transfer the char cloth into the bird's nest, and blow that bird's nest into a flame. Placing the char cloth on top of the flint. Take the steel striker, give it a good hit. Not quite. Again, not quite. Got some good sparks, but they're not landing. Oh, there you go. Okay. So now we're going to take our char cloth and put it in the bird's nest. Press it down on there. And unfortunately it burnt out far too quickly. So I think we're going to need to use more char cloth, and then we can blow that a bit better into a flame. So these are very small squares of char cloth. Obviously it's a small tin. I've put a piece into the bird's nest, so hopefully after it's struck I can then transfer it into there and it will catch onto another piece. Got another bit caught now. ago. So obviously that was still a bit damp. But we've managed to blow ourselves a flame. So I certainly think for a first time that was a success. I think when I make my own char cloth, I'm going to make slightly larger squares, and then obviously you'll have a longer burn time, and also the material you use can dictate how long they take to burn. But as I said, I'm going to go into char cloth in more detail in another video, and I'll show you how to make it. So you may think that flint and steel fire making sort of has no place in today's society. You may think it's dead in the water, but what's happened is that it's evolved and it's become more of a modern twist on things. And during the mid 20th century, the ferrocerium rod was invented, and that is essentially the same principle, in the fact that you've got a chemical element, which is ferrocerium in this case, and you're using a steel striker with a sharp edge, and you're scraping the elements into the air, which are oxidizing and causing that spark. The high difference being this is burning at thousands of degrees C, whereas the spark off of a piece of flint and steel is only burning at a couple of hundred degrees centigrade. So hopefully you may have found that useful and interesting. I like to think that this is going to be a bit of a series of videos looking at primitive fire lighting. We can look at other natural tinders, moving on throughout the year and into friction fires, which is something I haven't done a whole lot of, but really interested to give it a go. So thanks for watching, guys. Give it one of those, press the subscribe button. I'll put all the information that I used about the flint and steel in the description box, because there's an article I read about the history, and I think that's really interesting. And again, I'll put a link to the tin where I got my flint and steel. Nice company, I bought it all myself, so you know, hopefully if you're interested in it, get out, get yourself a tin, and explore the world of primitive fire lighting. So from me in a lovely Sussex woodland, I've been Rob. This is Sussex Outdoorsman. Catch you on the next one. Bye.